quiet, numbskulls. I'm broadcasting.
The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana. Radio show. The medical marijuana for you and me. Ah, yeah, the medical marijuana. Whoa, 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 yeah, the medical. It's the medical marijuana show. You will know.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Medical Marijuana Radio for Saturday night, May the 18th, 2013. A newsflash. This in from Washington, D.C.
I mean, I remember when BuzzFeed was just something I did in college around 2 a.m. It's true.
Yes, Mr. President, keep joking about BuzzFeed, and while there's people in jail for doing something that you've done and is not a bad thing. So, again, give us something to feed our buzz with, okay, and not make fun of it, okay, President? Anyway, tonight's show. No guest tonight. We're going to play some clips from the Medical Cannabis Department of Health meeting last Wednesday here in New Mexico, which was quite interesting. But first, a little bit of sad, unfortunate, terrible news. Top Organics, one of the great distributors and producers and growers up here in Santa Fe, was robbed by gunpoint on Friday. That's yesterday, and I will read the report from the police. Hang on a second. I'm sorry, guys. Where is that? Here. Okay, this is the news release by the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office. Medical marijuana distributor is robbed at gunpoint. About 10:45 a.m., the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office responded to a call of a robbery at New Mexico Top Organics, a licensed medical marijuana distributor. The business in Santa Fe County. 3 males armed with handguns entered the business and tied up employees and proceeded to take an undisclosed amount of medical marijuana. The suspects fled the area in one of the employees' vehicle, a 2003 silver Honda CR-V with New Mexico license plate 863-PCN. The vehicle again was taken by the robbers owned by one of the employees. The sheriff's office is asking the public's assistance in locating the vehicle. Anyone with information in regards to this case is asked to call the sheriff's office at 505-428-3720. Or Crime Stoppers at 505-955-5050 for those of you that would like to remain anonymous. So if you know anything, see this car around, let's turn these guys into the authorities. This was also written up in a few different newspapers by the Associated Press, but there was no news. I heard, anecdotally from some people. First, they said it was the dispensary that was robbed, and then the story has come out that it was the grow operation. So we don't know exactly what's going on. Mark and Peter are great guys at Top Organics. They didn't deserve this. Their patients certainly don't deserve not to have their medicine. So, this is something that I hope Governor Martinez will not use against the program. It's been 4 great years that this program has been serving patients. There's over 9,000 patients in the program here in New Mexico, and they deserve good medicine, and Top Organics did not deserve what happened yesterday. I'll keep you posted on that. So I'll read the strain report. It's a small one tonight. These are the strains available from a few of the grower-producers here in New Mexico this week. Starting on Tuesday from Canaceutics, Blueberry Kush, Holy Grail Kush, Critical Jack, Big Bud, OG18 Indica, Bob's OG, Duke City Diesel, and Super Lemon Haze. And that Super Lemon Haze is fantastic. I've had their Pheno, and it's just wonderful. Grab it. That's Canaceutics. Medzen will have Green Crackle, Super Skunk, Lemon Kush, White Rhino, Big Bang. They have Sativa Dominant Wax, which is BHO, and also Indica Dominant BHO Wax. New Mexican, they will have this coming week, Chem Dog, crossed with OG Chem. They have Trainwreck, AK-47, CBD Skunk Haze, CBD Critical Mass. They also have plenty of hash and I guess some other oil. Let's see. They have Black Temple hash, G13 Haze hash, all $35 a gram. Popcorn Buds from Trainwreck, AK-47 Mazar, OG Kush, CBD Skunk Haze at an eighth is $32 plus tax. Blue Dream Critical Plus Wax, BHO, a gram for $70 plus tax, and LA Confidential half a gram, $35, and that's BHO. Also a special dark wax, $50 a gram, no half grams available while supplies last, and that's made from Critical Plus and Captain Z and Kahuna. That's New Mexican. And again, our best go out to the guys over at New Mexico Top Organics. Coming up, June 13th, the American Drug War, number 2, Cannabis Destiny, presented by the Arizona Cannabis Nurses Association, Thursday, June 13th at 7:30 p.m. to 9:15 p.m. in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the Chemo Theater. So get your tickets, and we'll talk to you more about that. So we will get to the DoH meeting now. We'll be right back after this.
Hey, this is Scott from Rare Dankness. You're listening to Medical Marijuana Radio.
So that's Scott from Rare Dankness, a great breeder. And so this past Wednesday, twice a year actually, the Department of Health and the Medical Cannabis Program have these meetings with a panel of physicians that are on the Medical Cannabis Board of Physicians, where they recommend certain things. The first clip I'm going to play is about 13 minutes long, and this is a status report for the Medical Cannabis Program given by Ken Grogel, who is the I'm not sure what his position is up there, but he's one of the top muckety-mucks. So here's a report, and it's very interesting stuff, I think, if you listen in. This is giving you an opportunity to hear what the procedures are and how the medical cannabis program is run. Most people can't attend these things. Either they're not feeling well enough or they're working. So check it out. Interesting stuff.
Basically what I'll offer is an update of the status of the program in a few primary areas regarding the performance of the program, enrollment in the program, etc. As of the end of April 2013, the total number of active patients in the medical cannabis program is 9,090. Total number of active I guess I'll give you a quick update. That's a change of a little over 1,000 active patients from the end of October of 2012.
Since the last hearing, then?
Correct. Secondly, is regarding active personal production licenses. There are currently 3,285 active personal production licenses issued by the program. This is a variance from the previous report where it was 3,040. One of the significant factors in this area is that in the earlier report, that was the end of October 2012, approximately 38% of all active patients added a personal production license as a result of their registration. For the end of April 2013, it's now 36% of all active patients that have a personal production license. Another interesting stat is regarding pending applications. Currently, there are 429, or at the end of April 2013, there were 429 pending applications. Now, what that means is folks who are either within the 30-day window, which is written into the rule for processing of the application. This also includes folks whose applications have been delayed due to the need for additional clarification or information. Remember that an application only goes into the 30-day measuring stick, if you will, upon receipt by the program of a complete application. This is reflects differently from the previous report at the end of October 2012, when there were actually 697 pending applications. What we attribute this 39% change in, or improvement is the fact that it was right around October of last year when the medical cannabis program actually became fully staffed. It was actually at the end of that month that the 6 people currently working for the Department of Health in the medical cannabis program came online. And so we believe in great extent to the efforts of that staff that we've been able to cut into the time it takes for applications to be reviewed, processed, and responded to within the program. Yes?
Are these pending applications new and renewals? Or?
That's correct. That's correct. They're just new. Pardon me, my
okay.
Ken, do we know how many applications since the last public hearing have not been acted upon within 30 days after the receipt of complete materials?
I would ask the program coordinator to respond.
We've been tracking by month how long it's taking us to process applications from the date of receipt until the card has been issued. The last 4 months, we've been averaging 26 days from the date of receipt until the card's actually mailed out.
Average?
Yes.
So how many have been over 30 days?
None that I'm aware of. Maybe 1 or 2 that were delayed simply because of misfiling or they were placed in the wrong area. But there's been, we've made a very conscious effort to ensure that we are under that 30 days to ensure the patient, there's a bug flying around me, I'm not going crazy.
That's Andrea from the DoH.
I don't see it.
Amount of time.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other information on this report. The next area is qualifying conditions count. And the significant areas on this, of course, is that post-traumatic stress disorder is has been and continues to be the #1 qualifying condition of the program, followed by chronic pain. At this time, there are 3,811 active registers for PTSD, which accounts for 42% of the overall enrollment in the program. At the last reporting time, the end of October, that number was 40%, with 3,350. As far as chronic pain, the current number of enrollments is 2,643, which accounts for 29% of the overall enrollment in the program. And in the previous period, October 2012, that number was 2,287, or 28%, so it's been fairly stable. So overall, between these 2 top enrollments within the program, in October of 2012, they accounted for 68% of overall enrollment. As of the end of April 2013, they account for 71%. Going on to the next page, and please, if you have any questions, let me know at any time.
I do.
Go ahead.
How many applications of the ones that have been processed, both applications and reapplications since the last hearing, have been rejected for any reason, and what was the basis for the rejection?
I'll let Andrea, to respond to that?
We have had a total of 3 rejections of applications that were flat out denied since the last meeting. One of them was because of a concern the doctor had regarding the diagnosis. Another one was because the person was out of state and wanted to apply for the program. They can't do that. And the third one was because the patient could not provide medical records that supported the diagnosis.
Well, what about all the PTSD applications that have been sent back to patients? We're not calling those rejections.
No, when we send, there's 2 different processes. Once we review an application, if we need more information, we'll send the patient a letter requesting more information so our doctor can process the application if it's a medical record issue. And then if we get that information back, we will process it. We will keep that application on file for 6 months for the patient to turn in the requested information. At that time, the application would become void. And denial is one where we have denied the application because of pretty serious issues.
Is there a count about how many of the PTSD applications have been sent back, either the physician or the patient?
We don't have a count on that at this point. But they would be included for new patients. It would be in the pendings. So, yeah, they would be included in that.
And what's the usual reason for sending them back for
It varies.
PTSD?
Sometimes the driver's license is expired and we need a valid ID. Sometimes it is because there's no medical statement or information. Other times it's because our medical director is requesting medical records. The doctor missed a signature. The doctor didn't provide information. The patient didn't complete their forms. They didn't sign the release of information. So it really does vary to what we're missing on the application.
Okay, we will also be discussing this at great length under agenda item 7, probably B and C.
I have a quick question. Just a quick logistic question. For those clients who don't drive, what forms of ID do you accept? If somebody doesn't
New
have
Mexico ID, New Mexico driver's license, passport. We just need something to indicate that they're a resident, a full-time resident of the state of New Mexico.
Great, thanks.
On the next page, you'll find the cumulative totals record for patients from January of 2012 to the present, end of April. The most significant information regarding this is that of the 9,090 currently active patients as of the end of April 2013, this accounts for 69% of all enrollments since the inception of the program.
Sorry.
Finally, on the last page, we have the county allocation. And the key elements I would point out there is, of course, that our most populous county, Bernalillo County, leads the way with 2,423 current active patients. That's 38% of the total number enrolled in the program. And Santa Fe County is the runner-up to that one with 1,267, or 14%. That ends my report regarding the program.
Are there any concerns that have been expressed by law enforcement to the Department of Health medical cannabis program regarding the participants in the program?
I'm not following your question.
I guess, how is law enforcement viewing the program currently? Are they having any strong concerns about the law as it is being enacted?
I'm not aware of any concerns in that regard.
Since the time of the last public hearing, have there been any formal reports filed with the medical cannabis program of adverse events affecting patients enrolled in the program?
There has been one. In that case, the individual's medical practitioner was not a participant or did not certify the enrollment. but was an active member of the patient's care and presented written request to have that patient removed from the program due to adverse response, basically due to condition.
And that patient was removed from the program?
That is currently in the process.
Okay, and is the patient aware of the fact that there is an appeal process to?
That's all part of the notification process.
Okay. When you said that the program is now fully staffed, is there a medical director of the medical cannabis program?
Forgive me, I don't believe I said fully staffed. I said that there were 6 staff members that are now dedicated to the program. If I did, I misspoke, and I apologize.
He did say that.
The current allocation for the program under the Medical Cannabis Fund is 7 positions, one being the medical program director, and that position is still being advertised.
When was that position first advertised?
I couldn't answer that.
I think March of 2012. Would that be about right?
That sounds about right.
I think that's true.
Okay. So, have there been applicants? Have there been interviews? Have there, at any point between March 2012 and now?
When I came on, I was made aware that there was discussion with a potential applicant, and that those discussions did not result in the position being filled.
Is the position currently advertised, or?
Yes, sir.
And are there applicants?
I'm not aware.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so that was Dr. Steve Jennison on the board of physicians that make recommendations for the medical cannabis program, talking to Ken Grogel from the medical cannabis program. And they've been without a medical advisor, I'm not sure what the position is called, for over a year. So that's probably slowing things down over there. Anyway, PTSD has been very controversial. I believe that New Mexico was probably the first state with a medical marijuana program to actually use PTSD as a condition to get into the program. And from the very beginning, they have a regulation where you have to have your primary care physician plus a pain specialist in order to get in the program for PTSD. And that second signature is very, very hard to get. And some people it takes months. So anyway, this is some conversation going on. The board would like to remove the second signature, something that I've stood up at these meetings and asked for over the last couple of years. So finally they're getting to it, and there's some really interesting conversation about it. So listen up on this one.
So at Dr. Johnson's request, we are going to hear item 7B first, which is the requirement for yearly confirmation of the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder by a psychiatrist or psychiatric nurse practitioner. So I guess my first question is, where in the regulations is there a requirement for yearly certification by a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner?
Mr. Chairman, the regulations don't speak specifically to this, but they don't differentiate between the requirements for initial...
Could you speak up a little bit, because I don't think anyone else, I can barely hear you.
That's Attorney Chris Woodward. Getting himself a microphone finally.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was saying, Mr. Chairman, there is no specific requirement in the regulations regarding that. The regulations don't differentiate between the application criteria for an initial application and subsequent renewal applications for PTSD. And so the Department of Health requires that the same materials be submitted, evidence of a current diagnosis of PTSD.
And what would be the rationale for doing that, given that a diagnosis of PTSD would seem to be something that would be fairly long-term and not really something that one would ask for a reconfirmation of? I mean, I can see it for acute appendicitis. I don't see it for PTSD.
Well, again, the legal basis for it is that the regulation doesn't make a distinction between the criteria of what you need to submit for initial and what you need to submit for renewal. I mean, the policy question of whether there are conditions for which the Department of Health should require less frequent diagnoses is a separate policy question.
Well, I don't see that it is necessarily the requirement for a yearly diagnosis, because that's part of the yearly recertification. The question is whether that diagnosis needs to be reconfirmed by a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner, given that then puts, I would think, a very significant burden upon the patient.
That was Dr. Bill Johnson.
Well, again, I can't speak to the policy of it. All I can tell you is that the regulation, again, doesn't differentiate between the submittal requirements for initial and renewal.
Beyond the policy, I have a question about the procedure, which is how did this get changed? And if I don't understand, because I know we're having this conversation right now,
Dr.
but it seems to me that policy has already been instituted without notification to patients in the program as well as to practitioners in the state.
I can't speak to any changes. I'm not aware of changes with respect to this.
I believe you were at the meeting. There was a meeting called a few months ago where this issue came up, and unless I'm really demented, it was my understanding at the end of that meeting that the policy as it existed a year ago was still in existence, but I've been led to understand that that's not true, and that the requirement for the recertification or by a psychiatrist or a clinical social worker has been demanded of patients.
I don't remember any specific discussion of this particular issue.
Really?
Really, yeah. I mean, in terms of communication with patients and with practitioners, I mean, that's something that the program may be able to address. I know that they've been revising forms to make them clearer about what the submittal requirements are for things, and trying to gather information, contact information to practitioners to include them on a list whenever these sorts of forms are revised.
So I do have a legal question for you, which is under the Advisory Board Responsibilities and Duties, Title 7, Chapter 34, Part 2. It states that one of the responsibilities and roles of the Medical Advisory Board is to review conditions previously reviewed by the board and approved by the Secretary for the purpose of determining whether to recommend the revision of eligibility criteria for persons applying under those conditions, or to review new medical and scientific evidence pertaining to currently approved conditions. Would you or would you not believe that the substantive changing of eligibility requirements for renewal would fit under the sort of thing that the Medical Advisory Board should anticipate being consulted?
I think it's certainly something that the Advisory Board can comment on and can make recommendations to the Secretary about. However, the criteria of the regulation have not changed. They've remained the same since 2010, at the time when PTSD was included.
I've been looking forward to this discussion for a while as a psychiatrist. I've tried to summarize some of the issues that may be affecting patients under that requirement, which are basically access, expense, availability, and the last one of necessity of the renewal by a psychiatrist. Clearly there's the expense of the yearly specialty interviews and the ability to access a psychiatrist in rural communities, or because of the limited geographic distribution of such specialists. These are expensive, and there's no insurance reimbursement for that visit, and there are, as I said, a limited number of psychiatric specialists or psychiatric nurse practitioners who are able or willing to provide those certifications. One idea may be to open the certification process to prescribing psychologists, of which there are a limited number in this state, but that would increase the whole program of prescribing psychologists was initiated to provide better geographical access to specialized mental health care, and that may be a way to improve access. It seems to me that cannabis is a classic psychiatric medication in the sense that its primary effects are on the psyche rather than the soma, the mind, rather than the body. So it kind of makes sense for a psychiatrist to be involved in the monitoring of the use of this medication. But that's not to say that primary care doctors don't prescribe medications for ADHD or schizophrenia or depression. A large percentage of the antidepressants, more than 50% of the antidepressant prescriptions are written by primary care providers. So there's that gray area where there's considerable overlap between those who feel comfortable with the psychiatric care of their patients and those who prefer that they be managed by a psychiatrist. This is cannabis is an allegedly harmless drug because it has no lethality, but there is the possibility of psychiatric side effects that we've discussed in prior public meetings when we have declined to recommend that cannabis be approved for psychotic disorders. I believe there was a split vote on bipolar disorders in the past, things like that. So there's some ongoing controversy. It's certainly not clear to me as a psychiatrist that the sort of just say no perspective that cannabis will make you psychotic is true. That's kind of old news, and that it certainly does not cause schizophrenia. It may be one aspect in the initiation of a first psychotic episode that has developmental psychiatrists like myself somewhat concerned about it. But it's the number of such patients is very small. And I don't see any data from the other psychiatrists that I consult with who do inpatient psychiatric work that there has been a rash of new psychotic breaks by virtue of using the medical cannabis. I guess the best way to talk about it to my colleagues is there's the stress vulnerability graph, that if you have a high genetic vulnerability to a psychotic disorder, it's going to take less of the cannabis to get you psychotic. If you have a low genetic vulnerability, you may still become psychotic from use of high quantities or large quantities of cannabis, but there's a whole continuum there, and by far the majority of users, medicinally or recreationally, have no lingering problems with this particular issue. There are some bad outcomes, but not many. The user of medical cannabis for post-traumatic stress disorder is not really seeking to get high. He or she is seeking to reduce their impaired functioning by improving their sleep or reducing their anxiety. So that we are not seeing bunches of just 18-year-olds trying to get certifications on the basis of PTSD just so they can get high. It's self-treatment to maintain or improve their level of functioning. And I think, if self-treatment is indeed harmless, we might even go all the way to legalizing the possession of medical cannabis or cannabis in general, like Colorado and the state of Washington. So, those are some of the issues that I would like to hear commentary from other members of the committee and perhaps the members of the public as well. Can we do that, Steve?
Sure.
Okay. But I'm trying to sort of clarify the issues. Dr. Adams.
Yeah, to be very honest with you, the powers to be on this would have us have a psychiatric opinion on certification and recertification. And that's all I can say, the powers to be. Now, who that is, you all know. My personal feeling, being a practitioner for 40 years, is that, and I'm not a psychiatrist, but I think PSED is a chronic condition. I think once you've got the diagnosis, it's not going to disappear in a year. I still personally feel we ought to have a recertification every year. I don't care if it's by a GP, neurosurgeon, whoever it is, but at least they're saying this patient is improving, doing well on cannabis, and is not having any side effects. I think we got to have that. Now, we need a psychiatric reconsultation, recertification. I don't think so.
So what then would you say might be the motivation or the rationale of the powers that be if it wouldn't be necessary medically to reconfirm the diagnosis of PTSD?
I don't want to go there.
Thank you.
He said he doesn't want to go there.
Anybody else want to? Yes. Dr. Torres.
Hi, I'm Dr. Catherine Torres, and former.
Just going to pause this for a second. Dr. Catherine Torres was the Secretary of Health. I'm not sure how long. I don't know if it was just a year and a half. And she never came to one of these meetings. Even when she was requested to, she never showed up. And now she came into this conversation. She stood in the back of the room. And let's listen to what she has to say, but probably too little, too late. So here's former head of the Department of Health and the Medical Cannabis Program, Dr. Catherine Torres. Listen carefully. It's a little bit hard to hear, but here we go.
And I was invited to come today to some of the people I've worked with in the past. But I will say that the powers that be before October 11th, 2012 did not put anything on me to say that had to be done. So I will say that was due by that time. The other thing was, I guess what I'm a little confused because I agree with you that the primary care provider does treat a lot of the post-traumatic stress disorder, and there's been a lot of confusion and a lot of concern. And I know that the Board of Medicine is coming up with some guidelines so that providers can make sure that they're doing things correctly. But I think what's confusing to me is we don't require that for cancer. And most patients will go into remission of cancer before they will go into remission of their post-traumatic stress disorder. Am I correct? So I don't understand why we're doing it for one diagnosis and not another. So if we could just have some clarification, because out there's a lot of confusion around the state as I've met with different providers, and they really, really want good clarification, as well as the Board of Medicine. As they develop their guidelines, they want to make sure that we're all on the same page of how we're doing this. So can we just have some clarification?
I can't give you clarification because that's not it's a hellfire job, Craig.
I can tell you from a program perspective, every condition we have requires some sort of statement or medical records every year. The ones that we have that require specific certification, for example, for glaucoma, we have to have a certification from an ophthalmologist. It's required every year. It's, Dr. Elting, no offense, but I review the applications. I can tell you what we're asking for now. I can't tell you what was done a year ago because I just started 10 months ago. So I can tell you that since October, we do require this. So painful peripheral neuropathy requires medical records. They have to be submitted every year. Chronic pain, 2 certifications. It's every year. So the ones that we do have those specific requirements on, we do require every year.
Okay, well, for the record, I've been signing certifications since the program began, and that has never been the case. I verified it at least 4 or 5 times.
This is Dr.
And was told point blank that as long as the initial verification was there from a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner, or that the patient had glaucoma, that as long as it was there, it's part of their permanent file with the Department of Health, that it did not have to be resent every year. That is what I was told numerous times. Regarding the PTSD, I agree with everything that Dr. Johnson said, and I just want to make a specific point about the veterans. It is impossible for many veterans to have access to a psychiatrist. Many of them are lucky if they even get to see a psychologist. I mean, we're talking, I don't know what the percentage of people with PTSD are veterans. I suspect it's quite high. And I suspect that a big percentage of those are Vietnam veterans. They've had PTSD for 30 years. They've been self-medicating. This program for them provides legal recourse for them to continue, for the most part, what they've been doing. Now, that's not true for all of them, and some of them have waited, excuse me, for it to be legal. So you are putting in a severe, undue burden, particularly on veterans who, number one, hate going to the VA. They find it particularly traumatic, and it aggravates their PTSD. Many of them go to other places for ongoing counseling. They go to the veteran centers. Why can't we get them to bring something from there? And many of them don't bother going. They've been through everything. They have tried every drug. They have been doing this for 30 years. Our young Iraqi vets, they take up plenty of time at the VA. The older vets, they don't even want to go to the VA because they think, and they'll say, we need to make room for these younger guys coming back. So in addition to the fact that there are, for example, in Tier C, there are no psychiatrists. We have plenty of veterans. We have plenty of people with PTSD, and they have zero access. So again, you're putting just an undue burden. I can tell you I get a referral a week, 1 or 2, from a psychiatrist sending me patients. And they're very willing to make that, to send certification. But for them to have to do that every year or to send notes, I'm a physician. I've been doing this for, 20 years. I feel pretty capable about asking somebody, okay, you've lived out on a ranch for 20 years. Did you, since a year ago, have you moved into the city and now you live with a group of people? That's not the way people with PTSD live. They live out in the middle of nowhere because they don't want to be around another person. And it doesn't change. I don't care whether you've been in the service. I don't care whether you've been raped. I don't care whether you've been, sodomized by your father. Everybody has the same symptoms. And I just feel like you are placing a severe burden on patients in a state that doesn't have the resources.
And I would say that the part that I have concerns about is all of the things that have been said already, but also that given that this unquestionably represented a significant change in the functioning of this part of the program, which is the largest part of the program, was done without consultation with the Medical Advisory Board, even though it's clear in the law and the regulations that the Medical Advisory Board has an authority in this regard, has a role as defined in the regulations. And that bothers me.
Okay, so that's some of the discussion so far on the second signature for PTSD. Next up is a very short statement by Drug Policy Alliance spokesperson Jessica. I can't think of her last name, but she's here in New Mexico, and they fight for a lot of rights. And here's Jessica.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Jessica Halai. I'm with the Drug Policy Alliance, and I just wanted to speak on this matter as well. I appreciate what Dr. Elting said about the veterans. As we know, 3,800 New Mexicans are enrolled under PTSD, and most of them are combat victims, people with disabilities, and victims of serious trauma and violent crime. Requiring patients applying for PTSD get a psychiatrist or psychiatric nurse practitioner signature every year creates an unfair barrier to legal access to medical cannabis, because people who suffer from post-traumatic stress often have difficulty creating these trusting relationships, as Dr. Elton was mentioning. Additionally, New Mexicans who live in rural areas may not have psychiatric or psychiatric nurse practitioner anywhere close to them, and for those who are homebound or on a fixed income, seeking care from a psychiatrist certainly isn't easy and maybe impossible. With over 175,000 military veterans in New Mexico, including many who have relocated specifically to have legal access to medical cannabis for PTSD while maintaining their access to care through the VA, it disrupts their continuity of care because it requires them to have a secondary psychiatric evaluation as well. So it just starts to derail things that, when people finally start getting them going. And psychiatric appointments can be costly, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, twice or more expensive than going to see your general practitioner, who you may already actually have a trusting relationship with if you're in a rural area that's separate. So it just creates a lot of difficulties, and it's unnecessary.
Thank you.
So that was Jessica from the Drug Policy Alliance. Next up, I always have to chime in, so I thought I had something important to say, and here we go.
May I say something in regard to chronic pain, second signature? I know many people that live in different parts of the state that have to wait 4 or 5 months to get that second signature, and I think that's outrageous that they need to wait that long, just because of logistics. So people are suffering extra long because they can't get an appointment with that second signature. Thanks.
I would like to follow up on that by asking program whether they are aware of recertifications being delayed beyond the time when someone's original or last recertification expires as a result of not being able to get a consultation with one of the required specialists in a timely manner. We do not.
Okay, so now, next up is pretty interesting. There's a doctor down in Albuquerque who advertises in many publications that his practice is strictly cannabis related, and he signs up people to get into the program, and there is a need for doctors to that are willing to sign up patients for the medical cannabis program. But this particular doctor, whose business is, and he admits to it freely, is 80% signing up for a second signature for chronic pain, he's the only one that is against the second signature. That's his whole business. I guess he's going to lose 50% of the fees. So let's listen to Dr. Steven Rosenberg, and you'll hear from him why he believes that 2 signatures should stay.
Certification report. First of all, in my office, you can have an appointment in a week or less. There's plenty of opportunity. I'm not even working 5 days a week because of this, so there's plenty of opportunity to come from anywhere in the state, which people do.
The whole point is people shouldn't have to drive from all over the state to get a signature. It's too hard for people to get out. They're sick, they work, and this gentleman wants people to drive from all over the state to come see him.
2 patients from Clovis this morning. Secondly, when a recertification is done, it is my policy to evaluate what the effect of cannabis has had on the patient. That's the purpose of the recertification. Is it gives me a chance to evaluate what I have recommended. Then the whole visit is basically devoted to how are they using their cannabis, when are they using their cannabis, have they gotten good pain relief, can the pain relief be optimized, what strains are they using. It is not just a repetition of what maybe another pain specialist or doctor has done. It is the opportunity to follow up. And in some states you're required to follow up and you don't get a whole year, and I think follow-up is excellent. And in primary, many patients don't have primary care doctors. come to see us, and so they have no opportunity to follow up. Others have have very little knowledge about medical cannabis whatsoever, and don't provide them with any follow-up, and so patients continue to suffer year after year because they're not properly using their cannabis. So there is a definite other way of looking at how a recertification is done and what it should include.
Okay, and in response to that, here's Dr. Eve Eltling and responding to the situation.
Be really careful and qualify what we're talking about. I think there needs to be consistency about what the demands are on these patients, because as we pointed out, each of the conditions that have additional requirements, the requirements are different for each one, which really doesn't make any sense to me. Again, in this state, glaucoma, again, it's very difficult to access an ophthalmologist. Many people see optometrists who also diagnose and treat glaucoma, as an example. For the PTSD, maybe we want to consider amending that to include psychologists with prescription authority. Thank you. And again, the chronic pain, here's my issue with chronic pain. I actually agree that people do not get referred frequently enough to appropriate physicians or specialists. The intent, I believe, when Dr. Vigil put this condition in, I think was a good one, because I think he was saying, what he did was allow us to encompass many things under chronic pain, not just bone pain, but people with severe chronic migraine headaches, I don't know, give me something else. Endometriosis, all sorts of things that require opioids, let's say, that people are taking. But originally, again, this allowed was someone like me, the primary care or the primary certifier, to, yes, include those records when I send them to Dr. Adams that shows this patient has been to a neurologist over 1,000 times in their 20 years and nothing has helped their migraine headaches. Now, why that person would need to get a signature from their neurologist, who is not going to do it, because I don't believe there is a neurologist in this state who qualifies as a specialist who will sign this. I know of one neurosurgeon who has signed about 2 for people who have failed back syndrome, but the documentation is there. I'm perfectly capable of getting those records or having the patient bring me those records and see, that they have seen the neurosurgeon and the neurosurgeon has written, nothing else to do. Patient has tried acupuncture, blah, 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 and is on this amount of opioids. But again, it's an undue burden for that person to have a third party, who they're just going to pay to, again, review those documents, which I've already reviewed, their specialist has already reviewed, and they've seen them. Or let's say they're a veteran who, again, let's say a veteran who has chronic migraines and has been treated over and over. He got shot in the head, he's got migraines. Why should that person need to go see an outside neurologist to, bring that person all their records and then have them not sign off on this? And then they're going to have to go see someone else. I mean, it's inconsistent, and again, I think it's discriminatory.
Okay, so that's discriminatory is absolutely right, Dr. Eve. And now here's a couple of minutes of Dr. Eve Etling and Rosenberg and Jennison speaking about the situation of taking that second signature away.
I would think that Dr. Elting is, I would say, a class by herself when it comes to medical cannabis.
This is Rosenberg.
She's board certified by the American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine and is conscientious and been doing this a long time. However, I have not seen evidence of other primary care physicians sending any documents to me whatsoever. Basically, they didn't even fill out the written point to describe the patient's condition. I see 3 check boxes and initials, no records. What the department gets, they come other things that I have gathered as the second person, not what the internist has sent. So I think
but that would be required, and that was required originally. It was required originally, just like I have to send.
It's not happening.
I know.
As I said, you're
well, you know what? There are people always who practice ethically, and there are always people who don't, and that is in every walk of life. And but I don't think that the patients should be penalized because of physicians or practitioners who are not ethical. And it would be easy to send the things back and say include documents, just like you're asking for with the ophthalmologist. Include the documentation that the person has glaucoma and you know, or send back to the clinicians, you know, here's an example of the way this should be completed. And if you don't do it this way, especially for the ones who do it over and over again, you know, we're not going to accept it.
And every now and then I like to remind myself of the original intent of the Linen Herring Compassionate Use Act and how it passed the New Mexico legislature and was signed by the governor. Under Section C, Paragraph C, it says, "The department shall verify the information contained in an application submitted pursuant to subsection B of this section and shall approve or deny an application within 30 days of receipt. The department may deny an application only if the applicant did not provide the information required pursuant to subsection B of this section, or if the department determines that the information provided is false." So, you know, as I remember the discussions, and I was there for 7 years of discussions in the legislature about the medical cannabis program, it seemed to me that the intent of the legislature was that cannabis should be available to those individuals with specified medical diagnoses who believe that they have derived benefit from cannabis when they have not derived benefit from other things. I think the management of a medical cannabis patient in the context of a patient-provider relationship is not necessarily entirely the purview of the Department of Health and its administration of the medical cannabis program, but is perhaps also within the purview of the New Mexico Medical Board in its relationship with its providers. So I sort of am a little bit nervous about the idea of saying, oh, it's really good to have a care plan and it's really good, yeah, it is. But is that the basis for making policy within the medical cannabis program within the Department of Health? I don't think so.
One point of view.
Yeah, that's my point of view. Yeah.
Okay, interesting stuff. There's one more little segment, and then they went for a vote. Hang on a second, I just actually closed up the wrong window here. Let's see, where is this here? That's this one here. Hang on. So yeah, just another few minutes, and then they're going to vote on whether to recommend to the secretary, who is now Dr. Retta Ward, to take off the second signature for chronic pain. So here we go.
My impression is that there are patients who are kind of in three phases of the program: the application phase, the acceptance phase, and the recertification phase. So if you've made it to the acceptance phase, you've consulted with a specialist, presumably you've consulted with your finest colleague, and would you then go and consult 10 times, 20 times on the same patient, on the same situation?
Because there is a strange belief many physicians hold is that what they're doing is working and that patient's better. Why do I keep throwing medications if his condition has resolved, his level of functioning has improved, he's back to work, he's with his wife again? So I think having that monitoring, it's not monitoring, it's a balancing where you sort of check off the list, because that's why we don't write OxyContin 3-year supply or 2-year supply.
But I guess one clinician is giving their opinion every year at the recertification. To ask for 2 clinicians to give a recertification feels like that clinician would have just chosen to be a PA if they really wanted to consult that many times. It just seems like why would the recertification have 2 signatures or 2 clinicians if that one acceptance had everything about the chronic condition in it? It just seems to me almost a waste of the doctors in our state to be doing that double timing when they're already protected by the first signature of the specialist.
Oftentimes with patients, we have a contract with them. But at the same time, we don't monitor their cardiac status, we don't monitor their kidneys, we don't take care of their other conditions. So they're being seen by a lot of other physicians. And then to have an independent or some PA or nurse practitioner or some primary sign off for all the specialists without really seeing what they're doing, what they've been doing, what their plans are, puts everyone again in the vacuum. But if there was some continuity of care where the people work together, this is not a necessary fundamental thing. I think the post-traumatic stress, those people have a lifelong condition. I don't know how many Dr. Johnson has cured, but I think it's not going to be.
There's no such thing as cure.
Oh, thanks.
As far as without medical cannabis,
right.
You can't cure PTSD.
But I think in pain, I see many pain patients starting to post their orthopedic procedure 6 months later playing basketball and they're back to playing sports following a spinal injury. That's not a chronic pain patient. That's someone who was debilitated during his rehabilitation phase and he's recovered, and if he's reevaluated, you wouldn't want to continue with the same doses of the same drugs. So a year later, it's nice to reassess that. That's my opinion, but I think there's lots of...
Is it your belief that we're admitting non-chronic patients to the program?
Again, I think when an operational definition of severe chronic pain, I think, again, that's quite vague from our standpoint, but I think from the Compassionate Care Act, it is underlying responsibility. So, yes, I think if they don't have something measurable, something objective, something supportive by a couple of physicians, it's hard to just label that person as a chronic pain patient, where by definition, it's not chronic pain after 3 weeks. Okay.
Ms. Halai?
With respect to Dr. Pennington, cannabis is a very different medicine than opioids, and prescribing opioids that lead to overdoses is not the same thing as recommending cannabis for pain, because it's not going to cause an overdose. There's been no reported overdose ever in existence from cannabis. I just wanted to stand up again for the people in this state that can't get here today because their pain is so severe that they can't leave their house. Getting to that second doctor's appointment is a problem. It doesn't matter if it's, if it's 5 hours away or if it's an hour away. If you're in pain constantly while you're traveling there, you shouldn't be discriminated against getting medicine that works for you just because you now have to get a second opinion on it. Perhaps if it needs to be a specialist, a second opinion with a specialist for original enrollment into the program, that's something that, that makes sense. But beyond that, it should be one statement once a year. We know that there is a lack of medical practitioners in this state. As another woman said, it's taking up practitioners' time that that they may not have, and patients may be on waiting lists. It's just an undue burden, and it's not compassionate at all. Thank you.
So I'm reminded of the things that I read in preparation for the hearing of the petition to remove PTSD as an eligible condition. There was a RAND Corporation report about the status of PTSD treatment in the United States that stated that only 47% or something like that of people with PTSD ever received any medical appointments, and only half of them, or about 25%, could probably received anything that even resembles the recommended treatment for PTSD. So I think we need to be mindful of the fact that whatever it is we recommend here, we're not going to fix the medical care system. Either for PTSD or for chronic pain, the medical care system is woefully inadequate to what is required for either of those conditions.
So now they're going to take a vote. Now, it was a little bit confusing to everybody, even on the panel and in the audience. But as I understand it, actually I don't understand it. I think they're going to take away the second signature for recertification. Anyway, it's confusing to me, but they'll explain it, and here is the vote.
Can we vote, please? All in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. All opposed, raise your left hand. No. It was unanimous, so very good.
All right, so the board of doctors, the committee up there is going to recommend to the secretary, Dr. Red Award, to remove the second signature. So we'll have to see how that turns out. Now, we didn't get to play everything. Next week, I'm going to play a few clips from something they're calling cannabis dependency that they spoke about here. I don't know where that term came from, but there'll be some audio next week on that. So we'll be right back to close out the show.
The medical marijuana, the medical marijuana, radio show. The medical marijuana for you and me. Yeah, the medical marijuana.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for listening. I hope that this chance to hear how the medical cannabis program is run is helpful to you. And hopefully next week we'll have another guest and give you some more information about what happened at Top Organics. And my heart goes out to the patients of Top Organics and to Mark and Peter. I want to thank my two radio mentors, both with the initials HS, for their inspiration. And don't forget that there's some people and companies out there that are really not medical cannabis friendly. So F. Wells Fargo, Bishop's Lodge, Cannabis.com, believe it or not, for not being friendly to the medical cannabis community. And there's one more F, you know who you are. And you understand when I'll be smiling. We'll be back next week. Feel well, everybody.
The medical marijuana.
Shalom. Shalom.
Good night, everybody.